Hi, I'm with Simon Maple today, who is a field CTO for Snyk. And Snyk, if you're not aware of them, are global leaders in security, empowering developers to create safe apps and software. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Great to be here.
Excellent. Lovely to talk to you. And you have so much expertise in this area. Obviously, security and privacy is a really hot topic at the moment. And I'm just wondering, how do you envisage the world as a safer place in sort of 5 to 10 years? What will need to take place and evolve in order for that to happen?
Great question. And I think there are a couple of areas that are very hot topics today that I think are things in which we will see become more mature and grow over the next 5 to 10 years. One of which is obviously getting a lot of press from world leaders who are, adding like Biden's executive order and other governments around Europe and around the world, working out how we can define effectively what our software bill of materials is, which is ultimately trying to understand which third-party libraries, what external software is really being pulled in and built into our application. And I think it's core for organizations and development teams, etc., to be able to have a handle or understand what they're pulling in. So open source is one area that has obviously existed for many years, but the core aspect of when we see breaches and when we see issues that exist around open source, none less than Log4j, of course, which happened just last month. One of the areas here is about more knowledge for developers using open source, having more responsibility about what open source libraries that put in. And a lot of that is cultural, a lot of that is educational. There's equally a lot of tooling that can be used to help developers with those decisions, whether that's around health, whether that's around remediation and picking right versions to be pulled in, whether that's about getting notifications when vulnerabilities and security issues exist. So that's one area. And I think, a lot of the solutions here are going to be obviously great tools, but it's a cultural shift. And that is something that takes time. One other thing, which is again, big, very much talked about right now, is supply chain security or supply chain management.
Yes.
And of course, this goes beyond third-party libraries. This is around pipelines, how you secure your SDLC, how you secure which other products are being used, build services, build tools, build plugins, those kind of things. How can you make sure that the pipeline that you're building is secure in itself? And there's a lot of implicit trust there. And I see solutions that don't exist today, existing in a number of years that are really going to help to that. So I don't think we're quite there just now, which is why the OpenSSF, for example, is a great organization, is a great project, which is trying to identify what can be done around supply chain security, which is one of the aspects which Gaipo, our founder and president, is working on with the OpenSSF as well.
Yes, it's a very key topic at the moment, isn't it? Especially with the new government regulations in the UK. And obviously they're very keen to protect those sort of essential providers of sort of water and transport. And yes, so if you were talking to someone at board level who wasn't aware of security risks, what are the top things that you need to be aware of in cloud native security?
So if I was talking to someone higher up, I think what I would really try and explain is how the shift in expectations has moved from the departments within their organization. So a couple of things there, but if we look at just purely the development work that gets done, a developer previously used to write code. They used to sometimes pull in some open source libraries and then deliver that to an operations team or to their SRE team, the platform team, that would run that in production. A huge amount of that has changed these days with cloud native. We see much greater prevalence of Docker containers, infrastructure as code, Kubernetes, Terraform scripts, these kind of things, which actually move the development, the maintenance way closer to the developers. And sometimes, depending on your organization, that will be entirely owned by the developer, sometimes used by the developer or slightly changed by the developer. Sometimes it's more the DevOps teams that run them. It differs from company to company, but one of the big one of the big risks of that change of ownership is knowledge, both security and just general knowledge of those areas are really core to the success of those deployments. So if you have a developer writing their own Docker container or writing their own infrastructure scripts, how capable are they of building security in from the start? How easy is it to copy paste other examples which are insecure by default, which have misconfigurations in them? So I think there's some really interesting new security risks just by the change in dynamic of how different teams in the organizations work, what they're responsible for. And I feel that there is a cultural shift all the way through from when DevOps started. It's continuing now with security. And I think the organizational risks there of the knowledge sharing and making sure the right people are communicating, that is one of the biggest risks, I would say, from a security point of view for cloud native applications today. Of course, a lot of that technology can actually be very beneficial as well. So if there's an issue in your container, it's much easier to spin up that, respin that container. If there's an issue with part of your infrastructure and you need to bring it down and create it again, you can do it from source. So there's much greater benefits as well that come with that technology, but there's a definite shift happening.
That's really interesting. So it seems like a lot of the discussion at the moment is about sort of filling those gaps where breaches could be, whether that's in workflow within a team or within, a third party's product that you might be using as an organization. So what can you do? What main tools do you use to empower developers to be more vigilant themselves?
Yeah, and of course, so myself working for Snyk, we're a tooling vendor, and people might expect me to say, you know what, you need to buy Snyk, or you know what, you need to buy tooling. This is the core of the thing that you need. And it's not. Tooling is there to support developers. It's there to give developers the information they need, help developers with that mitigation and the remediation. That's what great tools like Snyk does. However, it's not the core. The core needs to be around a valuable communication between your developers and your security teams. We need to effectively work as one team. And there's a few things that I feel are very, very important there. First of all, the security team and the developers working together at the right time. Previously, with Waterfall and other software development models, we saw security only enter the ring at a late stage, just before we released to production. And they would typically maybe pen test a staged environment or provide an audit that the development team could take away and fix. Now, when we were working at when I started my career 20 years ago, we were looking at releases of 1 year or 6 months or 2 years, or depending on the product or the application. Now, that was far less painful to a developer because they're not trying to release every single day. And so it's not necessarily a huge roadblock that's affecting them daily. It's a roadblock that affects them periodically. Today, with our DevOps and agile process, where we're trying to push to production fast, small changes, we want to do things multiple times a day. And you can't have bottlenecks there. We need pipelines that work very, very fast. And so getting your security team in at the right time rather than being a roadblock is very, very core. You also need that communication to be relevant and meaningful to both. And again, there's no tool that can help with this. This is a cultural shift where there needs to be empathy between developers and security. So developers need to understand where security are coming from. They're coming from a risk angle. They're coming from the understanding of what a breach could look like, what the vulnerability could mean from a risk point of view. The security team need to look at the developers and understand that the developers are looking at this from an architectural point of view, from an application point of view, from the point of view of, is this code actually reachable? Is this code actually being invoked in that certain way? And the two care about different things. And it's about really having that empathy, having that discussion at the right level to actually provide value to each other. And this kind of leads on to shared goals. Having developers and security have those shared goals. They don't have separate goals. Ultimately, there's one goal: to secure the application that you're developing. And that open communication between the two teams is what adds that. Now, of course, tooling and things like that will massively support those activities and provide the developers with the time, the information they need at the right time, the information of what they need to change, and even, you know, pull requests in the right places, so that it's minimal effort for a developer to do that. But I feel like the principle of pulling dev and sec together and having those meaningful conversations at the right times, that is what will empower developers, and I think one of the hardest things to achieve as well.
That's very interesting in terms of collaboration. Sometimes, you know, the secular world, we'll call it, doesn't think of the tech sector as being collaborative, but of course it's highly collaborative, and necessarily so. And in terms of security, we also have to think about ownership, though. So who actually owns a cloud native application? Who should own a cloud native application?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think everyone's going to do this differently. And of course, again, there's no perfect answer that's going to fit everyone. I think it's very organizational in terms of how different companies work. However, what we're seeing more and more is developers taking that responsibility of their applications. And I feel, when, you know, if we look at the size of the dev organization versus the security teams and DevOps teams, you're looking at 100 devs for 10 DevOps folks to one security individual. And where we think about wanting to deliver fast, wanting to grow and be dynamic, the only way you can scale that security person is if the security is embedded into the developers and into the developer program. So I think there's a couple of things we can talk about here. One is the responsibility, and maybe then accountability. So I think developers should ultimately be responsible for the security of the code that they write, the third-party libraries that they pull in. They need to be responsible for those decisions. They don't need to make the decisions by themselves. Of course, security can empower them by, you know, giving them assistance of what a good library from a security angle looks like, what security questions they need to think about, and they need to think about answers to with their specific architecture or their specific cloud native components. One really good mechanism that we've seen used very, very well is a paved road approach, whereby, you know, the security teams work with dev and DevOps teams to create almost like a golden image for a container, as it's called, or you know, a certain architectural or way in which different individuals from security and development teams have worked on to say, yes, this is a good, secure way of delivering a specific part of our application. Maybe it's templates from an IAC point of view, or something along those lines. And development teams can use those as a paved road, so they know they're getting security built into those templates or golden images. And of course, they don't have to stick to those paved roads. They can kind of go off route and get support from you know, certain teams, but that's the easiest way, the quickest way of being able to grab that. And I think that's a really good best practice.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. One other thing I'll just kind of like mention is, one thing that we don't want to do is say to developers, you know, here's this little box that you have to work within, and you can't go outside the box. It really stunts innovation within developers. So we want to be able to use guardrails and pipeline testing, etc., to be able to almost govern or police our usage to some extent. But we want to, there's a balance between that. We don't want to secure ourselves into bankruptcy, as it were. We want to still be innovative and still be able to, you know, deliver applications at the right level of innovation.
And obviously you've worked with, as I say, sort of large scale companies, smaller companies around the world. What's that experience been like? Obviously you combine solo working with this collaborative working. How do the two experiences compare?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think, you know, a lot of what we actually talked about previously around that communication, the effective collaboration, that's hard when it's not face to face. And I think being face to face, that networking, that being able to kind of like chat over a water cooler, those moments, particularly over the last couple of years, have obviously been much reduced. So it's harder for a security person to be able to get involved in a lot of those meetings, because meetings have switched from meeting rooms to Zoom rooms, and you can't walk by a meeting room and you can't walk by a Zoom room and spot a meeting happening and see if there's any value you can kind of like add to those. So getting involved is, can be considered a lot harder. Of course, with one of the great things is we've actually taken a step back and tried to understand, what some meetings are, which meetings are still useful, how can we change the way we're working, and it's always good to reflect on the way we work and if there are better ways of doing things, whether meetings are still needed in certain cases. But yeah, I think that the way in which dev and security teams can work together, particularly if they didn't have strong relationships previously and strong collaboration previously, it would be very, very difficult, to kind of like generate that or change things the way the world is today, with people not going into offices and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you very clearly and cleverly described the value of liveness and live interactions. And of course, you've presented a wealth of shows across the world, and been in some really interesting panel discussions. What do you gain from going to a conference or show? What's the big win that you take away?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very interesting actually, because obviously the last couple of years have been a little bit tough for that, but personal, like going to a show, the value is of course people, and networking, particularly, my career has been the last 10 years or so. I've been in developer relations and community, and networking was a core part of that. It was about talking to people you wouldn't normally talk to, learning from them, understanding, hearing different ideas of what people are thinking about. And it really gives you perspective. It really helps with empathy, to hear what others are having problems with, what others are having successes with. And I think from my selfish point of view, I can learn a lot from other people. So just because something's easy to me, hearing about how others are trying it and faring with it, that gives me a lot of insight. But yeah, people, talking to people outside of sessions is cool. We used to call it the hallway track, which is one of the core values that you have. So it's not necessarily just what you hear in sessions. It's about, let's talk to the speaker afterwards, or let's talk to a couple of people who had questions, because that was a really interesting question for me, and maybe they have the similar problems to the ones that I'm experiencing, and I'd love to dig deeper as to how they overcame that. So other good sessions like panels are great for hearing good discussion. Birds of a feather sessions are very, very good for being able to collaborate, as well as unconference style sessions, which really does make everyone a presenter. Really, everyone's a participant. So yeah, I certainly do miss a good number of conferences. I think perhaps you can easily get overwhelmed with a sheer number of conferences, sheer volume of conferences in a dev role. But yeah, certainly do miss them a lot.
Yeah, I think you've beautifully described the community around conferences too. And of course, we have Tech Show London coming up, and we very much look forward to seeing you there. Simon, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.